a senior judicial assistant in the Republic of Serbia. He's a PhD candidate in criminal law at the University of Kragujevac. I'm saying right? Okay, good. And he's going to present his project on the arm through robot concept, a context-sensitive method for criminal responses to robot-targeted harm. Thank you so much, Janko. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Beatrice, for a great introduction. I'm Janko Munic, and today I'll reframe the usual lens we use in AI and crime discussion. Most of the present debates focus on hard AI crimes, where AI is treated as tool, accomplice, or alleged perpetrator. Today I take the reverse direction and focus on cases that criminal law routinely misclassifies as mere property damage, where the robot is the target, but the legally relevant harm is human and social. As we witness, robotic systems are increasingly moving from novelty to infrastructure, especially in care, safety, and other essential services. For example, when someone vandalizes, disables, or manipulates such a system, criminals typically treat that harm as property damage, sometimes with an extra label like interference with the device. And in safety-critical settings, that reaction can be radically misleading, because the replacement cost of the machine can be the smallest part of the harm. The same act may amount to endangerment, disruption of essential services, exploitation of the vulnerable users with foreseeable distress and humiliation. Therefore, if the criminal law sees only a damaged object, it will systematically underreact. Also, there is temptation in the opposite direction, since one can declare a robot a victim and push criminal law toward the robot person. I believe that, at least for now, criminal law should remain human-centered, because we do not need to relocate moral status from humans to machines in order to respond proportionately. So the methodological question is, how do we translate robot-targeted conduct into legally relevant harm within existing criminal law categories, while keeping the person-thing boundary intact? As a solution, I propose the concept of harm to robot, which means that even when the immediate target is the robot, the legally relevant harm can be mediated through that system and ultimately borne by interests that criminal law already protects, such as bodily integrity, health, dignity, public safety, and confidence in essential services. Also, under my concept, the robot is not the moral patient, but the conduit. For context purposes, I give you two illustrations. First, consider a care robot in a nursing home that supports mobility, reminders, basic communication, or emergency call function. If someone disables it, the legal concern is not the price tag, but the predictable downstream impacts on vulnerable users. For example, care is interrupted, safety risks arise, and the dependent person's welfare and dignity are impaired to a tool, the institution that resident rely on. Secondly, consider a robotic safety device in a public transport that's manipulated so it fails at the critical moment, or a public safety robot that is sabotaged that can perform its protective function. The target in this case is the machine, indeed, but that harm is mediated and human because the conduct creates endangerment, disrupts safety assurance, and undermines the reliability of essential services. So the question here is not whether robots become victims, but how should criminal law qualify and weigh the human harm mediated through them? As one answer that I'm still developing, I propose a four-part test. This test starts with function, which should ask, what is that robotic system actually doing? Is it providing care and safety, delivering essential service, assisting police, or enabling environmental monitoring? Second part is reliance. Here we ask, who depends on it and how tightly? Reliance is the bridge between damage to thing and harm to legally protect interest, because exploiting a high reliance care setting is categorically different from tampering with a non-critical consumer gadget. Third part is foreseeability. Here we ask, for example, if that system is disabled, what predictable harms follow here? I use it as a constraint mapping tool to identify which harms are realistically in play, while applicability still rests on the jurisdiction of familiar mainstream categories. In Serbia, those are intentional negligence. I know that in USA there is also recklessness, something like that. The relevant harm categories include endangerment to bodily integrity, disruption of essential services, exposure to sensitive data, integrity breaches, plus the downstream harm that follow. And final part is the legal characterization. I use it as a broader notion that includes criminal offense selection, aggravation, and sentencing. The doctrinal label of the criminal offense may still fall within existing criminal law categories, but the criminal law reaction track real world stakes and remain proportionate because Not every attack on robot warrants special criminal law treatment, although in some cases that on the first sight look like property damage. Cases are in truth serious harm cases once we see what the robot mediates. Now we move to macro level and to the two doctrinal levers for lawmakers and courts. First is, many criminal law systems already distinguish ordinary property damage from sabotage, interference with emergency service, or attack on critical infrastructure. The key is to recognize that the same conduct performed in different social contexts leads to different criminal reaction. And the criminal law needs to recognize that interference with such a system, for example, a care system I used, there could be much more examples that I tried. It's a distinct category of wrongdoing because it's, in this case, it creates risk, interrupts care, or undermines public safety. So the practical solution for courts could be to do this through interpretive guidance and principle sentencing, while lawmakers can consider creating a narrowly tailored offense for function-critical interference, like disabling of robotic systems used in social settings without changing the legal or moral status of robots. Now, in cases where interference with a robotic system foreseeably endangers safety, disrupts care, or target vulnerable defendants, sentencing should reflect those features. And the other culpability is, in this case, is not that the machine by itself is harmed, but that the actor created a risk, exploited reliance, or undermined a socially valuable service. And this is orthodox in non-novel criminal law move, because criminal offenses in different jurisdictions are already evaluated for danger creation, vulnerability, and similar. Courts cannot apply this function testing approach if cases arrive without technical traces needed to test claims of manipulation, identity compromise, or disruption. A minimal evidentiary set should include incident documentation, access control, relevant logs, and record of disruption, plus chain of custody and basic identity checks. This will be likely tested through expert examination when the log identity, for example, is contested. And without this baseline, courts would either underreact because that case looks like property damage on the first sight, or overreact on some untestable claims. And this is not an open-ended call for disclosure of sensitive operational details that will compromise criminal investigations, but a request for verification because we need to know what was altered, how it was altered, and what downstream effects followed. And we should bear in mind that as robots enter essential services, forensic readiness is not an optional technical luxury, but a governance requirement. Now, in robot-mediated settings, attribution of the guilt often fails in two ways. Either the nearest human gets blamed flexibly, or complexity becomes an excuse, and responsibility dissolves the system. My concept keeps harm legible by asking which criminal relevant duties applied, who was responsible for them, what risks were foreseeable in that role, and whether reasonable safeguards were committed or bypassed. Oftentimes, the decisive failure is organizational, and it involves procurement choices, maintenance of the ability, access control, incident response, and other discipline. And keeping the guilt to humans prevents two distortion, that is, trivializing serious interference as mere damage or lacking responsibility to solve the system. To summarize, when robots function as the part of the infrastructure, targeting them be conduit of serious harm, so criminal law must learn to see through the machine. And this is why hard AI crimes and reverse cases belong in the same framework, and why will increasingly converge in real-world patterns. And one final key takeaway that I would like to conclude this speech with is that robots are not victims. Humans are. Robot is just the conduit. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Janko, for your presentation. I'm going to open the floor for questions or comments from the room. If there are any.
I have one again, but you go ahead. Who was it? Yeah. So this is so interesting. I mean, I just love a good robot harm paper, Janko. But one of the things that I find myself wondering about every time I hear a paper about law and robotics is what is special about robots? Okay, and I hear you. Your story, as I understand it, is what's special about it is that they form part of our infrastructure, our public safety infrastructure, They form part of this really precarious network of care. They have this important role in society, right, that helps people, and yet we don't associate them with public infrastructure risk the way we do other things like telephony or emergency services or things like that, right? And so the fact that we don't see robots in the same light as these other safety considerations and care considerations is problematic, and one way to remedy that is to understand that harm to robots is harm to people, okay? But if you read the long-standing literature on what makes robot harm different, we usually begin with the idea that robots, unlike other machines like my laptop or this projector, feel like people. Feel like people. So for example, something anybody in here with kids could maybe relate to this. If your kids are rude to Alexa, right? Do you correct them? Do you say, "Maleducato"? Let you talk about Alexa that way. My friend Duccio that I saw in Florence said that when the robots become conscious and start to kill people, he's going to be one of the first ones because he's so mean to his Amazon Alexa and calls it stupid and things like that, right? So why do we even bother having this conversation? I'm talking about whether you turn the light on or off rudely. It's because it feels like a person. It's anthropomorphic, okay? And why might you not correct your child? Well, because you don't want to teach them that some corporate created entity that exists to sell things is actually worthy of your moral respect, right? But very famously, Joel Feinberg, I don't know if you know that name, he is a famous scholar of harm in the criminal context of the United States. And in a multi-volume treatise that is incredibly impactful in the U.S. context, criminal context, he develops a concept of moral harm. Moral harm is a concept moral harm is a concept that has to do with the moral harm to the perpetrator. Do you see what I mean? And so when you attack, when you vandalize a coffee machine, or you vandalize a trash can, or set it on fire, it's not good to destroy property. There may be some harm to that, right? But when you harm something that feels to us like a person, it has in my work that you cited in 2015, it has a social balance. Exactly, And so I want you to think about that category of social balance, because that's also, I think, a very distinct difference. I think that's how we end up, as I understood it, was a very sort of Goldilocks project where you say, if we treat harm to robots as merely property damage, that's not enough. But if we go so far as to treat them like a victim, well, that goes too far, right? Why would we ever treat it like a victim? We would never treat it like a victim if I threw this phone into the air. You wouldn't have been like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan's iPhone. I'm so sorry for your loss." You know what I mean? It's only because it has that social valence. It's anthropomorphic. And so your response to how to locate between the pole of it's not just property damage, but it's also not a victim. It's odd for it not to have, as part of the conversation, the very reason why we might treat it as a victim, which is that it has that social meaning. So I love that you peel behind and you talk about how these things are becoming embedded in public infrastructure. We should recognize that as such. But I urge you also to explore the concept of moral harm and the idea that it feels different to society when you do violence against something that feels to us like a person. When there was the Hitchbot, I don't know if you know about this project. This was a project where in Canada they built this robot that would hitch its way across Canada. Okay? And it would start off, and all the robot would do is say, "I need a ride to the next town. I need, please help me get across Canada." And this robot got all the way across Canada, no problem. Okay? Then they did the experiment in the Estados Unidos, in the United States. And it only got as far as Pennsylvania before it was absolutely destroyed in Philadelphia and completely vandalized. And this robot was completely destroyed in Philadelphia, made national and international headlines because it was a robot, right? And so I love the project, but I do think you need to grapple with that unique aspect of robotics. So I'll cede the floor to my colleague with that, or unless you have a direct response.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, well, I could add a few notes regarding the first question. What the next?
Mike.
Mike, yeah.
Do you hear me now?
No, you have to press the button. You have to-
No.
Yeah.
It was turned off. Yeah. What makes robots different than other properties or AI by itself? First, embodiment. It's embodied, and we have their implementation in different societal contexts, like care function that I mentioned earlier, for example, and also social design. So those are three main factors that I will distinguish them from ordinary property. That's why they need special treatment. And okay, we can elaborate more on that. What can happen in certain situations? Why do some situations need special treatment, other not similar? But also, as I said, this is the lady laptop concept. I mean, currently, in this stage of development, the technology by itself, we do not need this category. Maybe someone from technical field could talk more on the consciousness and similar properties related to robotics. What are their potentials in equality with humans in these domains? But if the AGI by itself is possible, maybe we could consider something. But at least for now, this will only bring the confusion to the existing criminal law systems. So this will be my answer, of course, but I will also search more about the concept of moral harm that you mentioned. Also, yes, but we should bear in mind that, for example, kicking the robotic social design speaks about us, about characters, and while in if in those situations, maybe we could make some equivalents for what that are implemented in some those constitute humans. I mean, at least from a criminal law perspective, they're passive subjects to the criminal offense. I mean, that's will be just my point. Yeah, I let you the floor to you.
Thank you, Janko. Let me focus. But this slide is a provocation. Every time I read human-centered, I say, oh my God, we are back to Protagoras. I think you mentioned a crucial point, namely the balance that should be struck between legislative activism and the role of courts. This is very important, and most of the time, at least in Europe, this very point is forgotten. My suggestion, have a look at the report we published. We are in here the high-level expert group set up by the European Commission in 2017. Actually, we worked on the first draft of the AI Act. That was the group on liability for emerging technologies. The paper is from 2019, and it could help you. Just to understand, because one of the very interesting things we discussed when drafting the AI Act was what should be up to the courts to define, if you want, in a bottom-up rather than top-down legislative approach. So much so, my old joke, but it's not a joke, that the good part of the AI Act is all those parts in which the European Commission followed our advice. The bad part of the story is when they... And so, for example, if you look at Article 12 of the AI Act, you'll find all the law requirements set up by the legislation, which goes in your direction, that is, we convince the Commission that this is essential not only for civil as opposed to criminal law issues, but in general terms. And so, since I think, among many other things, I don't. To me, when I hear about a human-centered approach, I do understand, but at the same time, that's the main reason why these crazy guys in Brussels forgot all the environmental impact of this thing, which is a scandal, at least in Europe. How about the Green Deal? And then you forget about the environmental protection in the AI Act, not to talk about Article 95, voluntary costs, blah, blah, blah. But straight to the point, read that report, because it's very instructive about this crucial interplay between what's good for lawmakers to set up principles, Article 12 of the blah, 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 but then what's better, of course, at the end of the day, have come. So, good point, David. Go deeper with that.
Thank you very much for feedback. I really appreciate it.